Hello, everyone, and welcome to one of our sessions called Engineered, where we have a very experienced host talking about specific topic in the cloud infrastructure, AI, Azure, AWS, everything that engineers care about. That's why we call it Engineered, by the way. And today we have Carl with us, who is Microsoft MVP, a very experienced engineer, I think more than 10 years of hands-on experience building in Azure. Um, and yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have known you before before in the, and so, and I was always amazed by your content as well. You are sharing a lot of content, mainly on Azure and Terraform and how to build the right way. And so thank you for being with us today, Carl, and maybe I'll let you add an introduction and we can deep dive into the technical topic.
Yeah. First of all, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, like you mentioned, I'm Carl Lindberg, and I live in Sweden. And if anyone else who's watching, I live. It's not really Gothenburg, but in the Gothenburg area. It's important for if there's any Swedish people watching, because we always have the West versus the East debate. It's not only in the US, I guess, that is important. But now, like you mentioned, I work a lot with primarily Microsoft Azure. I have I like infrastructure as code, and I lean mostly towards Terraform, like you mentioned. I have written Azure Bicep, and I occasionally write Azure Bicep, but for my day-to-day job, it's mostly Terraform.
Terraform, and on Azure mainly as well, right?
Yeah, on Azure mainly. I have been lately had the opportunity to do some things with GitHub and also Datadog. So that's one of the reasons why I really prefer Terraform. Usually, is because of its use of providers, where I can automate infrastructure not only in Azure. I could, if I wanted to, I could automate infra on premise or even in my own home lab, I guess. So one of the major strengths there.
Yeah, and we have, you know, that we also have a provider for Domino Pizza, so you can order pizza by Terraform. By
really?
Yes.
Okay. That is awesome.
We can't be surprised enough with what's happening in the infrastructure. And so today we'll be talking about RBAC in Azure, and RBAC and versus ABAC as well. We'll be talking about ABAC role definitions and how we build it the right way. And I know that, like most of the time, when you talk to practitioners and you talk about Azure RBAC, it's simply like, you know, assign a role and that's it, get it done. But understanding what's behind the scene is key, especially for security and troubleshooting, because it allows you to also avoid a lot of headaches. So the stage is yours. So walk us through how it works, how we can understand it better, and the most important part, how we can build it correctly by understanding all the boundaries.
Yeah, for sure. So I will share my screen here, and I like the way you framed it. So whenever maybe you've taken the fundamentals course in Azure, or someone listening has done that, or if they're going through the Azure administrator certification, you of course touch on roles and RBAC. However, I feel like they are maybe not going as deep as I would have wanted them to do, and there's a lot actually to do and think about when it comes to roles. And perhaps we should start with the fundamentals. First of all, I should say you should be seeing Visual Studio Code right now, I hope.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome.
It's visible.
So, okay, let's talk about Azure RBAC, and let's talk about a role. So what is actually a role in Azure? And Microsoft likes to do this with several things, but a role is actually split into two different objects, we could say. So we have on the left here, we have something that's called a role definition. A role definition is basically a JSON object, you could say, that is sort of like the blueprint or template of what does this role do, what is it called, what name does it have, and what can you do with it. I like to try and use analogies whenever I teach any technical concept. So if you were to take this out of an Microsoft and Azure concept, you could say that this is like a job description. So for example, if you get hired as a janitor, then usually you would have a job description that follows that. And you would have information in that job description that talks about what you're supposed to do, what you can and can't do, perhaps, things of that nature. So if we understand that, then if we bring it back to Azure and we bring it back to this role definition and we zoom into the things in here, we have a few key things. So basically the role name. In this case, I've taken the example of an Azure AI administrator, which is a role in Azure. Much like you could be a janitor, or you could be a finance consultant, or you could be a HR person. Like there's different roles you can fill. And the other part, so I said it was split into two objects. The other part is the role assignment. This is super important to understand as well, that if the role definition or the job description defines or explains what you are able to do in your role, we have the other part that is the role assignment, which is where do you do this? I guess if we go back to the janitor example, you could have things that, yeah, you're a janitor, you have the role description of a janitor, but you could work in the Seattle office, you could work in the New York branch office. So if we bring it back to Azure, that means where are we enabling you to work with this role? So if I give you the role of Azure AI admin, you can have this assigned to different locations. So I can assign a role to a management group or a subscription or a resource group, or if I want to be super granular, I can even assign a role to a specific resource. So I can only perform my duties on this resource itself.
And
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the way you are putting the levels, like the management group, subscription, resource group, and resource, it does imply a hierarchy. So which means if you apply something at the management group, it will inherit all the resources beneath it, will inherit from it, right?
Yes. That's a super important thing that you just mentioned, that whenever we're working with Azure RBAC, it is important for us to know that roles, they are inherited downwards. Azure gives us a couple of different ways for us to manage our cloud infrastructure. So the top level resource is what's called a management group. And a management group you could think of as a folder if you wanted to. And then inside the management group, you can have subscriptions. So maybe you have one management group that is called dev or development. And then you have one management group that's called production. Or if you're familiar with the cloud adoption framework and that huge image that they usually have in their documentation, you know that they place management group at different functions, such as you have one for landing zones, you have one for the platform, for connectivity with networking, etc. Then we think about the subscriptions. So the subscriptions that we place inside a management group, the subscription is also just a container. It is just a container to hold your resources. And you have the ability to sort your resources into different resource groups. And the resource groups, they go into the subscription. So if I am given a role at the subscription level, it means that I also have this role for the resource groups and the resources within there. So super important to know. That was a good point, Shafiq. Are there any questions on this part, or should I go forth?
That's fine. I will be playing the devil's advocate, challenging and asking questions. Yes. So yes, I'll be doing it throughout the session.
That is good. Any and all questions are welcome. I just wanted to briefly, before we move on, if I can get the Zoom here, I mentioned that Microsoft likes to divide things into two objects, basically. And if you understand what I just told you about roles, then you will understand pretty much how it's set up with policies as well. So Azure policy, it's a critical thing to understand as an Azure administrator. But you already know that, okay, the same way that we do this with roles, we also have the split of a definition when it comes to a policy and an assignment. And if I have to put an analogy here, I said something that if Azure is like a huge law book, or all the laws are in that book, then you have policy definitions, which are the individual laws, like what do they enforce? Maybe it's a law about not performing Grand Theft Auto or not littering, or I don't know, it could be any number of things. And then you have location, but here we can think about it with a policy assignment. If you have the law inside the law book that defines what you can and cannot do, then you have the people who enforce the law, usually police officers, right? And they can be assigned to different scopes or different locations as well. They could be a street cop patrolling the inner city, or you could be a highway patrol officer. Like, there are different places you can enforce laws. And the same thing goes with Azure policy. We have different locations. We talked previously about management groups and subscriptions, etc. You have the same thing here for Azure. I hope that analogy makes somewhat sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, actually.
Awesome, awesome. It is always when I'm sitting, I'm thinking about how can I explain things in different ways, and then maybe it makes sense in my head, but everyone else could be like, I don't know what he's talking about. But I just wanted to bring it back to what we're actually here for, which is Azure RBAC and roles. Yes. And if we just zoom in a little bit to the role definition, I touched briefly on it before. I mentioned how it is the description of what the role is supposed to do. So we have something called assignable scopes. And right here, the example is just with a /. And what assignable scopes is about is it pertains to where can I assign this role. So if we go up here, I've actually taken this text and zoomed it up a little bit. What does assignable scopes mean when you see a /? If you see a /, it means the tenant root. And you always have a tenant root within your Microsoft Entra tenant, whether or not you are consuming Azure at all, whether or not you have a single subscription or not, you always have a tenant root, and you always have a unique tenant ID. However, if I want to be more granular, perhaps I have a scenario where I wouldn't want a role to exist in a certain place. I can be more specific about the assignable scope. I could say, here it is actually this specific subscription, and then I put in the subscription ID. Then it means that if I try to assign this role to a subscription that is not the one I've specified, I won't be able to do it. It won't be able to find it. And this is the same thing with the bottom here. It's just how to be even more granular, should you want to.
And so here, just a quick question about the difference between the assignable scope and in the role assignment, where we will be assigning the role definition.
Yeah.
Is there any overlap between them, or what's the main difference?
Can you repeat the last? It was, I had a lag.
Yeah, I said it. Yeah, of course. There is a role assignment. So you have the assignable scope. And in this scope, you put like subscription, root group, and you can go to the resource level. What's the difference between this assignable scope and the scopes when you use the role assignment, to assign the policy to a specific scope, management group, subscription, resource group, or resource?
So the assignable scopes inside the definition is just the template that says you have the possibility to use this at this location. But the role assignment is what is going to actually realize that instruction. So in this example here, where we have assignable scopes with a /, it means I can assign it pretty much anywhere. So I can take a role assignment and I can put it at a management group level, I could put it at a subscription level, or I could put it at the resource group level. It just dictates. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, in this point, in this specific situation here, if you put in the assignable scopes like a path to the resource, does it mean that you cannot assign it to like a subscription or a management group?
Yes.
Okay.
If you try and do it with Terraform, for example, it will throw an error or something similar to that. This role definition doesn't exist at this scope, for example. So what I usually, or what one usually does when it comes to actually both role definitions, but also policy definitions, that I would argue that perhaps in 7 or 8, or maybe more times out of 10, you would just put it at the tenant root, because it doesn't actually affect anything. If you create a role definition, yeah, exactly. It's just a template, so it doesn't actually do anything. It is when you convert this template and realize it into an assignment, that is when it's going to actually start doing something. So when we do this part up here, this is where I can start performing my role. Or if subsequently, if we switched it to a policy assignment, this is where it would start enforcing the policy, perhaps start denying certain resources from being deployed, for example.
Okay, I see.
If people are familiar with the cloud adoption framework, the Terraform module, there used to be a huge, like a monolithic module that deployed the entire cloud adoption framework. And it is like 90% policies. And pretty much all of them, I think almost all of them, just gets applied at the tenant root level. Okay. So unless you have like a super specific reason to keep it restricted, I usually wouldn't worry about it. I would just put it at the root. So I hope that answers that.
Yep, absolutely.
So I did want to talk about the next part, which is, okay, we understand that this is the name of the role, and I understand that I can assign it somewhere. But you probably have seen this permissions block. And you can see that there are actions, and then there are not actions. And what is that, and how does that differ from what we've talked about before? And to illustrate that, I actually would like to bring this image up. Something you have to understand fundamentally about Azure, and this is not role specific, this is just how Azure builds their platform. It is that everything exists within a resource provider. So what is a resource provider? Most often, people may not have even come across this concept, because let's say you get an Azure subscription. It's completely newly created. It usually will not have all the resource providers installed. But when you get the owner role, you actually have permission to register resource providers. And the way Microsoft does it is that you usually do it automatically. So that's why people maybe haven't come across this concept before. But resource providers, every resource that exists and every service that exists within the Azure resource part of things, so I'm not talking about Entra here, I'm talking just like Azure resources, they exist under what these resource providers. So an example is here, Microsoft.network is a resource provider. And Microsoft.network, it contains a bunch of services that are related to networking. So in the examples here, for example, I have the load balancer, we have a virtual network, which if you're AWS familiar, I think it's called VPC, right?
Yep.
So you have things like a firewall or a VPN. So if I have the data actions in the role that I got given, let's say, Shafiq, you just gave me a role, and the actions, not the data actions, that's actually incorrect. We're going to get to that later. But the actions you gave me, they looked like this. It means that, okay, what does this tell me? It tells me that I have a wildcard. So I can think like, okay, I can understand that I can use wildcard, which means I probably have access to everything that is under Microsoft Networks. I have access to all of these services. And I can see that the specific ones you gave me in terms of actions were read and write. So I can think, okay, so maybe you can be very granular about what actions a person can take. So if we look at this one that you gave me specifically, we can also understand that, damn, these are pretty wide permissions. Like I am essentially the master of networking with this role. I don't have delete, but I just have read and write in this example, but let's pretend I had delete as well. Then I know I can do pretty much anything with networking resources. However, if we take a look here on the right, if I try to do something with a virtual machine, or I try to deploy a VM scale set, or I'm trying to change a custom image that I have, since my role that you, Shafiq, gave me doesn't specify Microsoft.compute, I can't do anything. So when we talk about, let me go back up here. When we talk about actions and not actions, it is a way for us to say, yes, we can be very granular with what you're allowed to do, and we can see how different roles within Azure can be very specific to their use case. So if we take a look at the role Azure AI Administrator, it makes sense that this role is able to do things within Microsoft.search, for example. And maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, but Microsoft.search has to do with their like a different suite of AI offerings they have. This role in particular has actually a lot more actions, but I removed most of them just so that we don't spam the screen. But I can also see that, I can do not actions. So maybe I can tell you to do certain things, and maybe I can tell you I don't want you to do certain things. Does that make sense so far?
Yep, absolutely. And so here in the actions and not actions, you need to be explicit about all the paths where you want to authorize the actions, right? Is there like a wildcard, something where you can just put a wildcard for everything?
Yes. So that is actually a very good question. I want to switch screen here for just a brief moment. We're going to switch to the Azure portal.
Yes.
So you should be seeing the Azure portal right now.
Yes.
So I am at the point of view of a subscription, and I can go to access control, and I can go to roles to see all the roles that exist. And people will probably be, very familiar with the roles such as owner, contributor, and reader. So if we actually open up the owner role and we take a look at the JSON, you can see this looks kind of similar to what I had as an example inside the diagram, right?
Yeah.
And here we can see it's actually under actions, we have a star. So this means that there isn't a resource provider, there's not a resource, there's not a setting that I can't manage, pretty much. And what this also enables me is I can also give other people roles. And this is like a huge thing when it comes to talking about role-based access control is, depending on what I give you, you may be able to give other people that I didn't intend for you to give something a role. So what people usually do in that case is that they come to the contributor role.
And customize it.
Exactly. So then you have actions still. I can still technically do anything according to this. But when this gets processed and when this gets computed, you can see here's the first example we have of NotActions. And this will take precedence. And a huge important thing here is that you see we have something called Microsoft.authorization. This one is very important for anyone who is looking to learn roles and looking to learn how to govern Azure environments as a whole, because Microsoft.authorization is actually not only about role assignments and role definitions. You can actually create policies. You can delete policies or modify policies. So again, if I give you owner, you can give someone else roles that I didn't intend, but you can also make and create and delete and change policies. So we have to be really careful about those things.
And the implications.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a solution for how we can tackle all of this and make sure that we get everything we want. However, I don't want to spoil that yet. I want to come back to this.
Yes.
if it's okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So you should have some like elevator music, Shafiq, between when I'm switching screens. Yeah. Okay. You should see
yes,
VS Code again.
Yep.
So just to recap then, we understand that we have a definition for things and we understand that we have assignment for things, both roles and policies. I understand that I can do things with scopes and that scoping is very important in Azure. And we understand that there is a concept of inheritance, like you pointed out, Shafiq, which is super important. And we also understand that we have the concept of actions and not actions, and that they dictate what I can do or what resources I can do. So if the first part is more about where can I do things, this part is more about what can I do. Briefly, just before we move on, we talked about actions and not actions, but we also do have data actions and not data actions. So Azure is actually, you can say that it is built up on two different planes. So you have the control plane, but then you also have the data plane. And what are the difference? So the difference is that with the control plane, we can manage resources. And the data plane, we can manage things that the resources expose. So what does that mean? It means in the control plane, I can create a virtual machine. And then I can use the data plane to interact, maybe connect to it through remote desktop. I can use the control plane in Azure to create a key vault, but then I need data plane actions to be able to create and view secrets and keys and certificates. And finally, I could create a storage account and I could change settings on that storage account. I could change like blob soft delete settings and yada yada. But if I actually want to go in and actually manipulate files or blobs and things inside, you guessed it, I need data plane actions. And these are just things that we need to have so that we can be granular about. Everything comes down to that, basically. It comes down to being able to be very granular and have custom things.
And is there any overlap when you define, for example, something in the action? I'm on purpose like trying to understand deeply how it works, the evaluation works. If I define something in the actions and I define something in not data action, what could happen? What could happen? For example, I have the key vault in the actions so that I can read and write to the key vault, but I have in not data action maybe excluding the keys and the secrets. So I have the possibility to write to the key vault, but not the data. So what could be the overlap here?
Well, what happened in that case, my assumption is that if you have things that are related to key vaults under actions, depending on what they are, it just enables you to do control plane operations. However, as soon as you go to your key vault and you click on in the left navigation pane and you click into secrets, for example, you click open a secret, you may be greeted with that you don't have permission, basically.
Permission issue. Okay.
Yeah. So it is possible for you to be allowed to create the key vault and delete the key vault, but you may not be allowed to create the secrets that are inside the key vault, which is kind of funny, I guess. But that is just the nature of the game when it comes to this.
Yeah.
And Azure offers, so people may know that there's a concept of access policies with Key Vault. And there's also a concept of like storage access key or SaaS keys for storage accounts and things like that,
Yeah.
kind of bypass all of this, right?
That was my question, that I wanted to ask you. Actually, you have an architecture that I can share, and they would love your insight about it. So let's assume, for example, and I have real architecture from real life. So
yes,
here you can see I have a complete AKS architecture with different components. Like I have my Kubernetes cluster, and then I have the Key Vault that I will be using for my secrets, and I will be using for different things. And the question that I like when you were explaining the hierarchy and the actions of do and not do, my natural question, so the way I'm used to do it is, all right, I define here my Key Vault. So I can, for example, here create, as you mentioned, access policy. So let me just here in the blocks, I can create here, add a block and add an access policy. So this access policy, it gives me the permission. It gives me first where I want to assign it, like the object ID or the tenant ID. So the object ID, that will be accessed in the Key Vault. And the exact permissions, like on the secret, I want put, get, list, and all this stuff. For example, let me do it this way. So here I have this. And inside here, I'm going to add, if I take, for example, the secret permissions and I add it, I will be able to see that now I can assign like get, list, and so on. If I put list here, and this would be translated into the code in the access policy like this. So I have the hierarchy of the things that I can do. But also, and so in this case, I just need, or the second part that you were mentioning, if I want to use the roles, is I just have here a role assignment, and I do not do it with the access policy in the resource itself. I just say, I'm assigning the role Key Vault administrator. So here, if I take, highlight the connections. Yes, so here I'm assigning the Key Vault administrator for this object ID to the Key Vault. So here in this case, I'm abstracting the definition. I don't see exactly what I'm given when I define it in line with the resource. So what's the difference between both of them, and what's the best practice? Like, should I use one over the other? What Microsoft advises? And like, what's the nuances between both definitions?
Yeah. Great question. Great that you show this, because I bet people are going to be wondering. So the thing you showed first with the access policies, it is both access policies and things such as SaaS keys for storage accounts. And I'm thinking if there's any other service that have like a weird way of granting access. But if we just take these two, we have been talking about role-based access, right? And what the access policies from from a key vault from before, or the source key in order to access the storage account, they don't really follow role-based access, or they're not great at least, and it is hard for us to control. So you're actually, my recommendation and Microsoft's recommendation, if you view like I think it's in the Defender for Cloud recommendations, but it's also in the cloud or well architected, I think, it is not to use access policies. Don't use source keys. Another personal preference of mine, if it is possible, I like to disable local authentication to resources if I can.
Okay.
And this is a bonus as well, I guess. People often ask me about public network access. Private endpoints are good if it makes sense for you to use those. To basically, if you don't know what a private endpoint it is, it's something that enables us to integrate these PaaS services like Key Vault and Storage Account into a virtual network, and we could access it privately. If it is possible, it's great to use. But I also think, depending on what workload and what application it is, of course, is that at least having then, if a private endpoint isn't possible to use, at least try to lock it down to a specific subnet through a service endpoint, or try to lock it down to your public IP addresses if that's possible. But those are basically the recommendations. And if we bring it back to your initial question, it is to use the role-based access control, so the Key Vault administrator that you were demonstrating, use that instead of the access policies. So that's like a hard recommendation I would give.
Okay. But in this case, I would like, for example, for the role definition, I need to know exactly the name of the role, or I need to create a new role. So it's like there is one extra step that I need to deal with, is understanding exactly what I'm given, instead of just, secret read, write, get list,
I don't think that's, or it is subjective, I guess, but for me, I don't think that's a big issue, because what I see happening if you're using access policies is that you have the issue of, oh, I don't know what access policy to set. I don't know if I need to set list, or if I need to set get, or if I need to set something else. So what people sometimes, which I've done personally, usually they end up just throwing the entire set of actions at it and just, finally it works. Then that's not great either. So if people want to be able to be granular and they want to be able to read this kind of thing, it is not so difficult to find this information. We've actually already looked at it, but I could show you again if you want me to present again.
Yeah, let me add it to the stage. All right, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna do this. So the question we may have then is, if I'm not allowed to use access policies, what am I allowed to do? Well, you showed, for example, the Key Vault administrator. If we take a look at it, we can open it up. We can look at the JSON, and we can see that it can do any data action within the Microsoft.key vaults. And it has certain control plane actions, like you can read who has access to it through authorization, but then you can do things you can read and delete and things like that. But then maybe you're saying like, but wait, didn't you just tell me that when people don't know what access policy set, they just give them everything? And isn't this the same thing? And the answer is yes, that is the same thing. So what you need to do then instead, and you can filter these by categories. So I can filter, let's say, I think this one that we are interested in is going to be in security. So what do I have in security? Well, I have something called, let's see, I have something called a Key Vault secrets user. So then you just open it up, you look at the JSON, and then you see, oh, this actually makes more sense. Like, okay, I can see, first of all, I can understand that under vaults, I have secrets. So then I can think, I probably have something similar for certificates and keys. And then I have get secrets and read metadata. So this could also be, depending on what use case and what you need to achieve, this could be great if you just want someone to be able to get the secret, but maybe you don't even want them to be able to read the content of the secret. Then you can compare it to things such as Key Vault Secrets Officer. And we open this up, and then we see, oh, this one actually can do a lot, but it is specifically for secrets. Whereas the previous one we looked at, it didn't have secrets /star, it had vaults /star. So that's kind of how you have to do it. And I was actually gonna wait with this part until the end, but I think it makes sense to talk about this now. I think you do have a fair point that it maybe a challenge we have with this is, yeah, but you knew that the category was secret, or you already knew that this thing existed. And it is kind of difficult. Like, I don't know, it is hard for me to remember if I made a role available and where I made it available, what actions did I give it, and who has it. And it's like you mentioned, just by this, it's a lot of clicking around, and that is fair. And that's why I love infrastructure as code so much. And that is why you are not you, Shafiq. I know you're already convinced, but if there's anyone watching, you will be convinced of why infrastructure as code is such a game changer. A thing that people usually say if they're new to infrastructure as code is that, yeah, but it is a lot easier for me to just find what I need to find inside the portal and just click it open. But I would actually argue that specifically for roles and role definitions and custom roles, by the way, if you didn't know, you can make custom roles. It is a lot easier to have that in Terraform or infrastructure as code or Bicep. Like, it doesn't matter. So I wanted to show you some samples or examples. So I have some Terraform code here where I've designed a custom network contributor role. So the use case in my end is that, let's say I want to have a user-assigned managed identity, which, if people don't know what that is, you can think of it as a service account that is going to run and do certain things. I don't want to give it there is a role called virtual network contributor, but that role, it gives it too much access. And if we think about things such as least privilege, for example, then we're actually violating least privilege if I give it that role. And that's where we enter custom roles. And it is very easy for me to see. I have specified a parent ID. So I'm using the AC API provider here, but this works pretty similar with Azure RM. So parent ID, if you're used to Azure RM, this is just scope. So where am I making this role available? Remember from before, the assignable scopes part. In my example, I actually put it at my root. So this is not the tenant root. I have another management group that is called root under there. I give it a name. And then I say assignable scopes. In this case, it's actually the same. So I actually misspoke. I was wrong. We do have a property called assignable scopes, but I just put it at the same scope. But I could make the role available through the parent ID, but I could put it somewhere else through assignable scopes. And then we get to the actions part. So as you can see by reading the lines here, this one is particularly concerned about Microsoft Network. It looks at the virtual networks. So then I can understand that, okay, this is not a role for managing anything with a firewall or a load balancer, for example. It is to manage a virtual network. And it is specifically made for virtual network peering. So this means, okay, I can do write, delete, and read on the property that is called virtual network peerings on a virtual network. I cannot change the DNS settings, for example. So maybe you have a So maybe you have a colleague you don't really trust, or you have a service account, in my case, that is only going to be used for this particular operation that I need it to be used. It could be that I'm running a series of tasks through CI/CD. And this is a step where I just want it to be able to peer to virtual networks.
Okay.
And virtual network peering is just connecting two networks in Azure with each other so they can communicate. And this enables me to follow least privilege with this. And since I have everything here in front of me in code, I don't have to click around in the portal and look for where I stored this. And if you are following things like 4i principle, then I know that this is stored in version control. There's a reason for it. Hopefully I've shown this to a colleague of mine and he has said, yeah, this looks good. So he has approved a pull request. And if we ever change this, I just make a new pull request and we talk about why did we do the change. So everything is very controlled. So that is a custom role, but we can do the same. Or I should say that is a custom role. And yeah, in this use case, I'm just using it to be assigned with a user assigned managed identity. And then I have a role assignment. So now I've taken my custom role and I'm making an assignment. So if you remember the analogy from before, I'm taking the job description and I'm letting someone actually do the job it entails. And I set certain things. And I guess the important or interesting thing here is the role definition ID. This is where I point to the role I created. The principal ID is like, who is giving this? Is it Shafiq, or am I giving it to this user assigned managed identity? And what type is it? So I could say a user or a group. In my case, this is for a service principal. So I do that. And it just makes everything very easy. Like I don't have to, if we're very diligent about infrastructure as code, I can say, okay, I know that this is actually stored in this code base. I can just go and take a look at it.
Take a look at it, yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And we have a question from the audience. Actually, we have a few questions to make sure not to miss them.
Sure.
Yeah, one from Simon. Actually, two questions. The first one is, it's for you, Carl. He said, what's the weirdest thing you have done with ABAC, ABAC?
What is the weirdest thing?
Locking everything down?
Maybe the thing I just showed you, because that's just not an example for this thing. That's actually something I'm using for real. Actually, that, and maybe I have a weird scenario with a customer where they have their landing zone, and I want them to be able to manage their landing zone, but they do have a dependency on the central platform where we have certain DNS zones.
Okay.
Just for reasons. I don't have time to go in and explain exactly why.
Yeah.
But I need them to be able to register like a DNS record, an A record. But I don't want them to be able to go in and do anything else. I don't want them having access to my connectivity subscription, for example. So what they have is they have a group that they are a member of, and this group has been assigned this role. And the scoping of this role, so the role assignment is scoped all the way into the DNS, private DNS resource. So it's not assigned at the subscription, it's all the way at the resource. And the only thing they have is like the Microsoft.network private DNS zone, A record register, or something like I can't remember.
Very narrow.
Yeah,
Okay.
very narrow. Yeah. And that would be a nightmare to remember where to find and how that works if I didn't have it in Terraform. So
that makes sense. Exactly. Yes. Troubleshooting is extremely tough.
Yes.
And the second question he asked, could I use this to configure diagnostic settings but not touch other things on the resources?
Yeah. So
yeah,
pretty much. I think that I don't have this off the top of my head. If it is that certain resources have it's like the resource / diagnostic settings / read, write, delete. I think they do. So then you could, just like we talked about before, how we can be very specific about what action we allow. You could do it that way. Otherwise, if it's not that, if I'm remembering incorrectly, and it's rather that it is like Microsoft.insights / diagnostic settings, I guess you would have to do that, but then assign it at that very resource and be very specific where you assign it. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but either one of those two should work.
So the answer is yes. So
yes,
we can.
Anything is possible. Is the answer.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was all the questions.
Awesome. I noticed we have 10 minutes, so I'm going to go to talk about ABAC, since I think a lot of people are going to be interested in that.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to switch again. Sorry, I keep doing this to you.
It wakes us up. We
yes.
keep following.
Yes. All right. You can see the Azure portal, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just before you start, because when we talk about RBAC and ABAC, it's, for me, two different mechanisms. So RBAC is role-based, where ABAC is attribute-based. So maybe at the high level, help us understand what's like the main difference between role and attribute-based access.
Sure. So role-based is it's not always granular enough for us, but you could have a role-based access that says you have this role, and this role makes sure that you can do whatever this role has to do. And then you have attribute-based access, which is allowing us to be more granular, where we can say you can do certain things based on the attributes that you have. So the analogy for this, because I think analogies are helpful, is that imagine you and me, Shafiq, we have a company, and we hire janitors. So we have the role of a janitor, and what a janitor, what that role means is that you do certain things, but you also get like a key card so you can enter buildings, right? But now let's say we have 3 branch offices in our company. So we have the Seattle one, we have the New York office, and we have the Washington office. If we only had the role-based part, we could say that, yeah, you are a janitor, you get a key card, and you can enter buildings. Your role entails you to be able to enter buildings. But maybe we don't want the janitor who is based in Seattle to be able to enter the building in New York. Or maybe we don't want all the janitors to be able to enter any building whatsoever, because we have different regulatory compliance demands and things. So what we can do is we can use role-based and say, yes, you are a janitor, and your role means that you get a key card and you can enter buildings. But we also use attribute-based access. So on your employment sheet or in your account in Active Directory or whatever, you have a location property, and your location property says Seattle. So when you come to the Seattle office, you can enter it. But if you try and go to New York, for example, the role-based access states that, yes, you can enter the building because you're a janitor, you have a key card, but the attribute-based access says, but you're not from New York, so no, you can't access this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's clear when you give the analogy. It helps me visualize it. Yeah, and understand. All right.
I appreciate that myself, so I try to incorporate that and do that.
Yeah.
But okay, so but we are not janitors, we are Azure admins. So how does this make sense for our use case? I want to take a look at the owner role again. Remember we said that if I give you, Shafiq, if I give you this role, it means that you can give Simon, I'm just going to use Simon because you said his name was Simon, you can make him an owner as well. And me as the platform admin, I may not want that. That means I don't have control over who gets access. But perhaps I have given you, me as the platform admin, I've given you, Shafiq, a landing zone, and you've been given a subscription. And perhaps I want you to be able to assign certain roles because I don't want you to be reliant on me to do that for you. And it could be things like maybe you're developing an application and you need to give a user-assigned managed identity a specific role so it can do certain things. Or maybe you want to expose a part of your application where you want to give someone else, excuse me, where you want to give someone else access to a resource within your landing zone. These are things that could happen. But if I give you owner, then you can do too much. If I give you contributor, which a lot of people would think about then, we have to remember that we have the NotActions for authorization. So then you can't do that either. So how do we solve this? Well, you guessed it. We solve it by using ABAC, or Attribute Access Control. So I've actually done this myself. I have a user. He is called policy admin. Don't ask me why he is called that, because I can't remember. I just have that as a test user. But you can see here at the role, he is an owner. So technically, he and I have the same permissions here. But then you see at the far right, you see something called a condition. And I can view and edit this condition. So if I open this up, I see that, yeah, we're still talking about the owner role. But here, all of a sudden, I have a condition. So the condition is that, yes, Shafiq, I gave you owner, but whenever you perform the action authorization, role assignment right, I'm going to evaluate a few things. And this is super cool. This is like pretty awesome. So what am I going to evaluate? Well, whenever you perform the actual task of assigning someone a role, you're basically sending an HTTP request, and I'm going to look at this request. I'm going to look at the attribute called role definition ID, because with your request, you're sending a body as well. And then I can use specific operators. So I could use GUID equals or GUID not equals, and then you have the for any of all values GUID not equals. And then you can see here I've entered a bunch of roles. So what this is gonna translate to in the real world is that, yes, the condition is that you are allowed to perform this role assignment /write. But whenever you do, I'm just gonna make sure that the GUID does not equal any of these. So the role definition ID does not equal the user access admin or owner or role-based access control. But if it equals contributor, or if it equals a key vault admin, then I'm going to allow you to do it. So that in itself is pretty awesome, right? But I can actually take it a step further even, and I can add more things to look for in the expression. So I've added yet another thing. In addition to looking at the role definition ID, I'm also going to check at the principal ID. Who are you assigning the role to? And then I'm going to say that the GUID equals, and then I put in a identity for you here. So here I'm not using GUID not equals. Here I'm using GUID equals. And then I put in a principal. So what this means is that you can only assign this role to this UAMI, like this user assigned managed identity. So you can assign this guy pretty much any role except for these three that I put here. And then we have the same thing for delete. It's just the exact same thing. I'm going to switch again. But that in itself is pretty awesome, right? Because then you can be autonomous. You can perform role assignments. But I can also make sure that you can't assign anyone anything that I don't want you to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry for the flashbang here, since we've been using dark mode for most things, but this is how I can tell I'm at the right place. But now I'm logged in as this policy admin guy, and I'm at the Limburg Tech Development subscription. If I go to access control, I go to add a role assignment. I can see, first of all, I get an information. I'm showing a filtered list of roles because your permissions include a condition. So if I go, Yeah. So if I go to privileged admin role, I can't even find owner here. I can find a custom owner, but I can't find the owner role that I specified.
The owner.
Yeah. So if I click reader then, and I go to members, and I want to give someone this, instead of what you would normally see, you would normally see the entire Entra directory pretty much, or what you have access to at least. But I can only see this one guy because that's the only guy that I gave you permission to.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can only do things with this guy. So like I mentioned, you are able to do the things you have to do, and I can sleep well at night knowing that you're not going to give some intruder owner and they're not going to take over the environment, pretty much.
And here, like, what's the, because when I see this kind of setup, the first thing I think about, with my background, like managing infrastructures, doing the on-call and so on, like the first question is like, how does it look like in troubleshooting? Because when you have an issue, when you are troubleshooting, you have again one more layer and few places to look at. So from your experience, like how the troubleshooting is with these kind of setup?
Like troubleshooting in terms of what scenario are you thinking? That I'm not able to assign something, or?
Yeah, the scenario is like you have an issue, you assign something, but it's not working as expected, and you are trying to understand why it's not working as expected. Do you feel that this adds some sort of complexity, or usually people can figure it out easily and it's pretty straightforward?
So there are two ways to think about it. If I am the end user, if I'm policy admin in this case, and I'm not able to do something because it says I don't have access to, usually Microsoft is pretty good at giving me the error message. It usually states that, first of all, you get what resource are you trying to alter, and then it says which action are you, or do you not have. So it may say to you, Shafiq, it may say that you don't have a virtual machine slash deallocate if you're trying to deallocate a virtual machine. So you know just from that, okay, I don't have that access. If you want to find out which access you have, there is a thing you can press, which is view my access. And in my case, I can see that I am the owner, but I can also see the condition I have. So I can see that, oh, I have this condition for whatever reason. If I don't agree with this, I have to talk to myself because I gave it to me. But that is like how I can understand from.
Do you have it in the logs
user.
as well, right?
It's in the logs as well, yeah.
It tells you exactly maybe.
Yeah. It's like there's audit logs for who did what. And then what we talked about before, so I'll go back to this. If I am the platform admin, there is no way for me to remember all of this. I have to have it documented somewhere. And if we're back in Visual Studio Code, I do have an example here, owner with ABAC. So here I can see that I gave my user assigned managed identity. I gave him this, I actually gave him the owner role here. This is the GUID for the owner role. But then I get the actual condition. So a condition is a property I can use within role assignments. And if you're using Azure RM, it looks pretty much the same. And this is also a good point. This is pretty difficult to read and write, or read and author, I should say. So sometimes, even though it is blasphemy for some people, like it's not, you shouldn't do anything in the portal. Me personally, some things I actually do inside the portal to be able to export that specific code, and then I can change the code from there. So what that could look like, if I go back here, so here I am, like I'm maybe changing things in the GUID, and then I can come up here and I can switch this to code.
Oh, to get,
and then
okay.
And then I take all of this, and then I, like inside Terraform, then I would replace these hard-coded things with maybe a locals or a variable or something, just to make it easier to read. Because if I'm looking at Terraform code for the first time, I have no idea what this is. So I would make a variable out of it.
Okay. And is this one of the reasons you prefer using the provider Azure
AC
the
API.
actions, as API. Sorry, thank you. Instead of the official provider.
This doesn't make I would say this is equally as challenging or easy, no matter what provider you use. Is the short answer. I use if it's greenfield, 9 times out of 10 I would use AC API, just because I know I can get 0-day access to all the new resources that exist in Azure. It is a little bit faster than Azure RM, and also if people are aware of the Azure Verified Modules directive or project from Microsoft, they are moving most of their work from Azure RM to AC API because they have a requirement to be able to support all the newest things, and that requires AC API. But that does not mean that you shouldn't use Azure RM. It does not mean that you shouldn't get comfortable with Azure RM. And it certainly does not mean that Microsoft doesn't support Azure RM. It's just that they have to support the newest things, and then they have to use AC API. Yeah, so that's why in my examples, I usually use AC API. And it's a little bit weird if you're not used to it, but you get used to it pretty quickly. And in the end, it's just Terraform, man. Different providers,
Definition.
different flavors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we are 6 minutes over time, and it's a really great topic. And thank you very much for the depth of the information you shared and the explanation, and taking the time to go deeper in every aspect of it. I personally learned a few things while thinking about how you do things, especially on the ABAC part and the condition. That's super helpful. Any last thing or an advice that you give to someone who is working and cutting the teeth on RBAC and ABAC?
My advice is make sure you have a demo environment or somewhere safe where you can play around with it, and create a test user that you, just like how I did here, so you can see things happening in real life. Or in real time, I should say, in real life, and get comfortable using it with infrastructure as code, because it's going to be super helpful for you in the future. And one thing we didn't talk about, which is a recommendation I would give, is to understand PIM, or Privileged Identity Management, which is Microsoft's just-in-time access and time-bound access. And that is something I would always encourage people to use on top of all of this. My baseline is anyone can have reader at any time, as long as they've logged into the portal, they have authenticated with multi-factor authentication, they can see everything. But as soon as they want to write anything or make changes, I usually hide those behind privileged identity management.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yes, and this is a very important part, especially how how also you work within a team. You do not give the privilege to yourself when doing critical actions. You look for an approval before hitting production.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you want to change something, or it's the same thing where if you're doing pull requests, you should have someone else look at the code you check in, because I can think that I'm the best person in the world at writing Terraform, but I am not. I am definitely not, and I make mistakes. And even when I think it's something small, it can happen. So it is just good to have that kind of mentality within your team.
Yeah, and it's a healthy way as well to maintain production. It's not just one man doing it. It's like a team game.
Yeah, and don't be sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but don't, if you have a junior developer, for a lack of a better word, he can definitely review the code that a senior wrote, because the pull request is not only about correcting mistakes, it's for learning as well. So the junior can go through the code and he can ask questions like, why did you do it this way? Or what does this mean? And definitely, equally, the senior can review the junior's code whenever he checks it in, and they can work together.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very valuable insight. Carl, thank you very much for your time and for the session. Enjoy the rest
Thank
of the
you.
evening. I know it's getting like 6 p.m. your time or 7 p.m. your time, I guess.
Yeah,
So
7
yeah.
p.m.
All right.
It was super fun. Thank you for having me.
Yes, with pleasure. Enjoy. And for everyone, see you the next time. Goodbye.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
See you.